Good afternoon, or evening, I guess we're at now, aren't we? So, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Wendell Pritchett. I have the honor of serving as the interim dean for this year at this great law school, and I just have a couple of tasks. The first one I'm just about to finish, which is to welcome all of you here for this important and very enlightening, I'm sure, discussion. The second thing is just to say a couple of words in honor of ABA Pro Bono Week. And so I had a little bit longer remarks, but I'm just going to say one thing about that. People frequently ask me, are there too many lawyers? And I always say, we're not even close to having enough lawyers. And I just want to pause on that for a second and note the fact that the vast majority of people in this country do not have access to legal services. We do not have anywhere near enough lawyers in this country. If we had a little bit more time or a different context, we might talk about some of the issues with the legal market right now, but we don't have anywhere near enough lawyers in this country. But what we do have is a lot of excellent lawyers, and I'm about to introduce one of them and then turn it over to him, and then we're going to hear from a wonderful panel of excellent lawyers. But it's my honor to introduce the Honorable Theodore McKee, who is the Chief Judge of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, who embodies this public interest ethic. I just want to tell you a couple of things about Judge McKee, who I've known for a while, but I actually learned a couple of things myself when I was researching him. Judge McKee was born in a farming community near Rochester, New York. His mother, Etta V. Payne, was a school worker, and his father, Clarence V. McKee, was a waiter on the New York Central Railroad. He graduated from the State University of New York at Cortland, and then attended Syracuse University College of Law, where he graduated magna cum laude and was inducted into the Order of the Coif. Judge moved to Philadelphia, and after working for a couple of years at Whitlock, Shure and Sullis Cohen, he also served as an assistant U.S. attorney, deputy solicitor to the law department, and general counsel to the Philadelphia Parking Authority, which must have been a particularly interesting job.
That's a whole symposium.
Yes, I believe it. I believe it. So throughout his career, Judge McKee has demonstrated a deep commitment to public service, and that's why we're so honored to have him here to share some thoughts. So please join me in welcoming Judge Ted McKee.
That is an amazing bit of research, and all the times I've been introduced, nobody has ever dug down to find out, one, my mom's maiden name, and my mother and father's occupation. My hat's off to you, right? It's that great scene in The Godfather when Vito Corleone asks how much of it is in it for the Tartaglia family, and Sollazzo turns to Tom Hayden and goes, my compliments, counselor. Well, my compliments, counselor. I won't call you consigliere. I want to start by emphasizing something that Wendell said about there not being enough lawyers. The problem is the distribution, not the number. It's the same in medicine. People say there are too many doctors. Well, there aren't too many doctors. There are too many doctors clustered in large urban centers. But when you get away from that into rural communities, there are clearly not enough doctors, and the same is true of lawyers. When you get into traditionally and historically underrepresented populations and disenfranchised population communities, there's still a humongous problem of lack of representation. And just today's Legal Inquirer, I was mentioning this to Judy as we came in, there's a lengthy article about the problems of getting representation for, this is particularly kids, but it's not just true of kids, it's adults too, caught up in the nightmare of removal proceedings and the kind of Kafkaesque process that can lead one into. So we clearly do not have enough lawyers, but my guess is, since I assume that you're all in law school, either that or you're officious interlopers, one of the two, and they're here for the food, which is highly doubtful. I assume that I'm preaching for the converted. What I'd like to try to do, and I'm only going to take a few minutes, but I want to try to get you to broaden your definition of public interest and to start seeing yourself perhaps in more broad ways than you might normally think of when you think of public interest. Usually when you think about public interest, there's certain occupations and jobs that come to mind, and along with that is the image of perhaps someone in a dark woolen cloak who's taken a vow of poverty, living away in the legal vineyards. And that's certainly a large part, I guess, of being certain kinds of public interest lawyers. But another part of that is, I think, any kind of service where your primary objective is in benefiting others without necessarily being compensated financially for it. And in doing that, your focus is on not only representing your client, but improving the quality of life for people in your community. And I think you can do that in a whole panoply of ways. And one way you can do it, which is the antithesis, I think, of what many progressive folks think in terms of public interest, and that is by considering being a prosecutor, at least for some term of your tenure, if you're interested in criminal law, particularly interested, if you're interested in being a public defender. I think you're a much better public defender, number one, if you have a prosecutorial background and prosecutorial base of experience to look through the lens of your legal practice as you go about your work as a public defender. And number two, I think we can all agree that we don't want to see a criminal justice system where the only people in the courtroom who believe in the dignity, the humanity, and the fundamental rights of the defendant are the defendant's attorney. I mean, that's a bad set of affairs. That to the extent that we have people on both sides of the courtroom who believe in the dignity of the defendant and who want to work to uphold the rights of the defendant, including the Brady rights and everything else, we're much, much better off. And a lot of the problems we've seen with the criminal justice system, I think, would begin to disappear if we got away from a situation where on one side it's, I'm the good guys and I'm here to represent you, the bad guys. On the other side, we're talking about somebody who's wholly under-resourced, who's fighting uphill against a system that has a deck of cards stacked against him or her. That's a bad situation. And too many times and in too many jurisdictions, that's what we have today. And the other thing I'd like to try to get you to do is to think about seeing yourself going on the bench. At least don't eliminate that from your thought process. I'll refer to a certain population of the legal universe as less progressive than you may prefer, put it that way. And they're represented many times by people like the Federalist Society, and many of them are members of the Federalist Society. One thing the Federalists have done, which they're very, very good at, and that is from a very early time, cultivating interest in judgeships, promoting judgeships. I used to, not so much anymore, but I used to get resumes for clerkships that people would seem to go out of their way to put on the resume that they were members of the Federalist Society, which immediately told me they hadn't done their homework very well, that they were they were broadcasting the resumes. Not that I would not hire somebody for that reason, but that's not necessarily a cause celeb when I hire. But I'm not, it's changing recently, but until recently I never saw resumes where someone trumpeted the fact they belonged to ACS or didn't work for the ACLU or something of that sort. So I say that to suggest to you that we really need to think more broadly, and you ought to consider the fact that you can do so much in terms of ensuring fair interpretation of the law and quality under the law if you become part of the system by considering going on the bench. And if you're going to ask me how you do that I cannot answer. It's like trying to predict where lightning's going to strike in Saskatchewan on November 30th of 2027 at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You can't do it. I can give you what the odds are, probably. And there's certain occupations that probably reduce those odds and certain activities reduce those odds. But you can't run your life or embark upon your legal career shying away from those things that you think will deter or keep you from becoming a judge in the future, because things change. And 10 years from now, or 11 years from now, or 15 years from now, when you might be thinking more seriously about the bench, you have no way of knowing what the political climate would be or what kinds of things may or may not advance your candidacy for a judgeship. 10 years ago, if I had told you that in the foreseeable future, it would be acceptable for a majority of Americans to have same-sex couples uniting in marriage, you would have thought I was absolutely out of my mind. But that's where we are now, and I say that just to suggest to you that you can't base your career today by limiting your choices and only doing things which make sense to you today because you think that's going to limit your choices down the road. You just don't know. What you have to do today, I think, is embark upon careers that are satisfying, that make sense to you, and that hopefully you're serving someone other than yourself and your bank account and any financial advisor you might be fortunate enough to have. And if you do those things, then the other things may well fall into line. If they don't, at least you're happy along the way. But you can't start thinking now, well, geez, I can't take that job because 10 years from now, if I'm nominated to be on the bench, that's going to look really bad. I mean, if that's where your head is, then you really have missed the boat. And you're going to be very, very miserable, and you're probably not going to be any more likely to be on the bench in 10 years than you would have been had you engaged in something that would have been a hell of a lot more satisfying. So try to do things that are rewarding to you, that make sense, that hopefully will invoke the old adage of first do no harm. And don't let the dollar be your moral compass. And I think we can all probably reach agreement on those kinds of things that are consistent with public interest advocacy and also rewarding professionally. and personally.
I think it's my turn. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lou Woolley, and together with Kathy Carr, we co-teach lawyering in the public interest, and together we're going to have the pleasure of moderating a discussion today, which we hope you will find both exciting and interesting. We are celebrating the start of National Pro Bono Week and also the year beginning of the Penn Public Service Program's 25th anniversary. And the whole idea of National Pro Bono Week is an idea that emanated with the American Bar Association, and in the words of the ABA, it is essential that the entire legal community engage in conversation and action that results in equal justice for all. And so that's the conversation we want to have today. And we have assembled an all-star cast. I'm going to introduce the first two panelists. My colleague, Kathy Carr, will introduce the second. Before I do, I have one administrative announcement, and if you have a CLE form, you're supposed to return that to Lillian. Arlene will appreciate that I made that announcement. And so she's there to get your forms. And secondly, I wanted to just recognize that in the room is Professor Howard Lesnick. And we could not really have this event without recognizing him as the architect, the person who really had the vision for the public service program here at Penn, and the mandatory requirement, as all of you know. Penn is really the first national law school, and probably the second school in the nation, to adopt as a condition of graduation requirement of pro bono service. And it says everything about the ethic and the importance and what you have all done as students and all of your predecessors is really amazing. And so we owe Professor Lesnick a great debt of gratitude. And because she's much too modest to be on the panel, we also should recognize our guru here at Public Service, right? Arlene Finkelson, who's just... I'm going to introduce the first two panelists, but I realize that you have materials all about the panelists, so we'll keep it even shorter. We're going to make it much shorter, but it's really a great pleasure for me to introduce first Lynn Marks, a good friend and the longtime director of Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts, a statewide nonpartisan organization that's all about reforming Pennsylvania courts and really developing and obtaining a fair, impartial, and competent judiciary. Whenever there's a scandal, if you will, if I can use that word, the first voice you're going to probably see in the press, the first voice to stand up for judicial accountability, to maybe say things that others are thinking but they're not so sure they want to say. That's Lynn Marks, and you will hear her voice. And one thing about Pennsylvania, it certainly gives her a lot of opportunity. From Kids for Cash in Luzerne County to the traffic court corruption to the building of family court, and of course, if you've been reading the papers in the last week or two about emails on the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, there's too much opportunity. But hers is a strong voice for the public interest and for judicial accountability. She's also a very strong voice for gender fairness. She's a member of the Supreme Court's Committee on Racial and Gender Bias. She co-chairs for a long time the Gender Fairness Committee, and she's a very powerful voice for equality in our profession and in our society. She's chaired the boards of the Women's Law Project, Living Beyond Breast Cancer, the National Defense of Battered Women. She's been recognized as one of 25 Women of the Year by American Lawyer Media, one of 50 most influential women in the legal profession in Pennsylvania. And the Philadelphia Business Journal said in a big headline, Lynn Marks makes social justice a team pursuit. I didn't know that.
You did as much research as the dean did.
Yeah.
Are you going to say what my mother and my father did too?
No, I'm not. And she's also been the recipient of the Sandra Day O'Connor Award of the Philadelphia Bar Association, which really tells you how high esteem we all have for her and the profession does. So welcome, Lynn. It's great to have you here. The second panelist I'll introduce is another good friend, Andre Dennis. Andre is a retired partner of the Philadelphia law firm of Stradley, Ronan, Stevens & Young, where he had a diverse practice in complex civil litigation, frequent litigant in the states and federal courts. I just, in awe of some of the work that he has done over his career. He's litigated many civil rights and class action cases. One in particular, he served as class counsel in an action challenging conditions of Lehigh County Prison, which resulted in a consent decree that not only reduced the size of the inmate population, but required that they build an entirely new prison in Lehigh County. And I had a later case on behalf of a prisoner litigating in Lehigh County and going to that prison. And knowing that that was the new modern prison, I thank you, because the old one must have really been something. But what a difference you made in Lehigh County. He also served as backup counsel in litigation arising from the events on May 13th, 1985 that culminated in the bombing of MOVE headquarters on Osage Avenue here in West Philadelphia. And I don't know, Andre, if you'll talk about that at all today, but a very important chapter in the history of this city. Andre was the first elected African-American chancellor of the Philadelphia Bar Association, serving as the head in 1993 of the association. He's also been a member of the House of Delegates of the American Bar Association and the Pennsylvania Bar. He's also, though, a really active participant in so many public interest endeavors. He's the former president of Philadelphia VIP, former vice chair of Philadelphia Legal Assistance, and a long-time former board member, or I guess I got to know him best, on the Board of Community Legal Services. He's also, you may run into him if you apply to the Independence Foundation for a public interest fellowship, because he sits on the committee that makes those decisions and is a board member of the Independence Foundation. He's also a charter board member of the Public Service Program here at Penn and of the Homeless Advocacy Project, and was a steering committee member of Philadelphia Diversity Law Group. He served as the Thomas O'Brien Lecturer here at Penn Law School up until a couple of years ago, taught our students appellate advocacy, and we still try to get him back, but he's a tough sell. But he did a great job in that role. Andre received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Pennsylvania Bar Association in 2008, and he's an honorary fellow voted by our faculty in 1999. So Andre, welcome to this panel.
Nobody claps for Andre. All that stuff.
So I want to notice that was Lou's short
All that meat and no
version of
potatoes.
introduction,
Yeah.
all right? And one of the main things I get to do when Lou and I
Yeah,
co-teach
that's
is to try to keep him on schedule. So mine might be shorter, and it's not because these two next people are any less deserving. And I actually can tell you a whole lot about what Judy's husband does, what her mother was a
I can tell you
union
what Judy's
member.
husband does.
Jerry's father ran a real estate office, but anyway, we won't go through all of that. But I first of all want to note that Lynn Marks and Judge Jerry McHugh, and I'm trying to get used to calling him Judge because this is relatively new. And he's also so humble and modest that he gives me a hard time sometimes when I do that. But both of them were members of the class of 1979 of this law school, so we share all of that. And Judge Jerry and I got to know each other at 8 a.m. sitting listening to Judge Ned Spaeth talk about evidence. So and have been close friends ever since. So were you there too, Lynn? Okay. Just to say a little bit about Judy Bernstein Baker. Judy was the first director of Penn's Public Service Center. So that's what we're celebrating 25 years of. She was the Arlene of 1989 or 90 when they first picked someone, and how lucky was this school to get her into that position. Judge Jerry and I both served on her advisory board back through those years and continuing, and watched what has become such an amazing program unfold. I guess the other thing I should say about being in the class of 1979 is that Howard Lesnick and Ed Spearer were our real symbolic leaders and mentors at that period of time. We took an income maintenance course about which they had designed, was real cutting edge at that time, and so I think we also really owe Howard a debt of gratitude for starting us out on our careers. So Judy also, I'm mixing things up here a little bit, but Judy was also, before she worked at Penn, I want to mention this, she was a social worker at Community Legal Services, my organization. That's probably the best credential on her resume, right? And then after she did all of her work here at this law school, she became the director of HIAS, which is an immigration legal aid organization, incredibly important in this city. And I think as you students think about your career paths, what Judy has done is really interesting to think about, going from social work, and we have some people in our class who did social work, to lawyering, to working on this program, and then to learning a whole new body of law, immigration at an incredibly difficult time, as you think about that body of law, and now leading an organization which she has grown and which is of incredible importance as we go through this difficult period of what's happening with immigrants, and particularly child immigrants in our country. And I also should mention that Judy was made an honorary fellow of this law school in 1998. Judge Jerry McHugh is also, after graduating this law school, served as a clerk in federal court and ended up going back to the federal court finally this year after about a year of processes going through nominations and
Waterboarding, year of waterboarding.
A year of waterboarding in the Senate, right. And he made it and still looks pretty good. I could go on about Jerry. I got to go on about Judge Jerry at his robing ceremony in federal court just a couple of weeks ago.
No need to repeat it.
I won't go there. I won't go to much of it. But except to say, I want to say he is really what the federal bench has gotten with Judge Jerry McHugh is an incredible litigator. He really knows his stuff as a litigator. He was incredibly respected from all sides as a trial lawyer, very heavily recognized for that role. He brings just tremendous skills in terms of knowing a courtroom, how to behave in a courtroom, and behaving in a courtroom with integrity and excellence. So that's what we're going to have with him, and we're starting to see it already with some of his decisions that are coming down. So with that's probably all too much introduction, and we'll let these guys talk now.
So what we're going to do then is we're going to start with Lynn, and we've asked everybody to speak for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to ask Judge McPhee to make any remarks. Do you want to overrule, Judge? And then we're going to open up and have a conversation, right? That's our goal.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, after Lou and Kathy spent all that time talking about us, I just want you to really appreciate that that they are really the icons of the public interest community here in Philadelphia, and indeed the whole legal community. So it's really a gift that you have them here, as well as Professor Lesnick. Because the title of this program is Embracing the Responsibility and Privilege of Ensuring Access to Justice, I want to talk a little bit about responsibility and privilege. Personally, I believe that our law degrees are hard work, but they are a gift that most people don't have, as you heard Dean Pritchett mention. And I really think it is a responsibility to give back. And even if you don't give back in the traditional way of helping people who are traditionally thought to have issues with access to justice, whether it's something you want to help, your religious institution or kids or animals or something, it really is an opportunity to give back in some ways. But besides what I think, the preamble to the Pennsylvania, the Rules of Professional Conduct, cite 3 responsibility of lawyers. And I only mention this because I hear that some people are getting CLE for this. So a lawyer is, as a member of the legal profession, is a representative of clients, an officer of the legal system, and a public citizen having the special responsibility for the quality of justice. So you might not think that the quality of justice is really the same as access to justice, which is often thought to help people who are poor and low income and disadvantaged in some ways. But I like to think of access to justice in a much broader way. That access to justice is not just getting in the courthouse door. It's having a meaningful justice. It means understanding the proceedings before you. It means having judges who are qualified, fair and impartial, and treat everybody fairly, regardless of who's in front of them, regardless of their background. So I really think it much more, not just as getting, as I say, in the door, but the quality, and that everybody should have the same kinds of justice. I think there's some broad ways that people can give back, starting out from while you're in law school. I would urge you to take advantage of any kind of experiential learning, clinics, working at different organizations, internships. It's not only important to help you build tools for when you're practicing, but it also gives you something to talk about in interviews. And I really encourage it, and I know many students, I don't know, maybe most students certainly do that already here. But while you're in the workforce, there are actually also a variety of ways that you can do what we think of as public service. I mean, some of us, like Judy and Kathy and I, are fortunate to do that in our day job. Either you can do it by working on cases like they do, or all policy work like I do. Judge McKee talked about a day job in the criminal justice system, either in the DAs or the public defenders. You could work at a non-legal organization as a lawyer or not as a lawyer. But it doesn't have to be your day job. I mean, there are good reasons that a lot of people choose to go to even a big firm or a corporation or a smaller firm. But even in private practice, there are many things that you can do to work to ensure access to justice, and that could be in pro bono work, it could be volunteering or at different programs or sitting on boards. Music to our ears, you could give us money, you could help raise money, you could host meetings of nonprofits. There are lots of things which you can do, and you'll hear from the panelists of various ways of quote, doing, public interest. My career has focused on the third prong of a lawyer's responsibility, and that is working to improve the quality of justice. And so often when people think of lawyers, that's not what they necessarily think of as people doing policy work or working at nonprofits. It's more those who are known to be trial advocates and zealously, represent their clients. I was going to say they're august judges, but there are some, but if you've been reading the papers, some on the Supreme Court are having a little hard time of that. But most judges are doing wonderful, wonderful things. Yeah, right. But for me, I've seen my law degree basically as a tool to effectuate legal and social change for issues that I care deeply about. So I have worked as a staff person, a volunteer, a board member for organizations that have dealt with court reform and gender and racial bias issues, sexual assault, domestic violence, homelessness, reproductive rights. And my work has involved directing nonprofits, doing lobbying, working with coalitions of lawyers and non-lawyers. And my current job, as Lou mentioned, is with Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts, which is a nonpartisan organization working to ensure that all Pennsylvanians can come to court with confidence that their cases will be heard by qualified, fair, and impartial judges. And I think in a democracy that is just so important that people will feel like they're getting a fair shake. Not everyone agrees with some of the solutions that we are proposing, but we are always open to hearing other points of view. But I do hope that nobody disagrees with our mission anyway. So we were asked to share a few lessons, and I appreciated Judge McKee's. Mine are a little bit different, But I think probably first and foremost is to find your passion, find out what you are interested in, what turns you on, and follow that dream. And hopefully some of the things which you're interested in and are good at are something which you can turn into a career. Treat your law degree really as a passport to do what you want. Amazon has this book, I noticed, about 300 things you could do with your law degree. So, be creative. And it really is a gift also, and I know you're working hard for that, to have a degree from Penn. And I think all of us who went there experienced that. Second, I think it's important to really develop professional and personal relationships. Even though some of the people here are legal scholars, I still think that nothing is really more important than people. And that doesn't mean that you hang around with people who are necessarily all like you, but listen to others, learn from people who have opposing views, and treat the person who's the jerk next to you in con law in one way, because you never know where that person's going to end up, what could come back to haunt you. Yeah, right. Prioritize. There's just too much stuff to do, and there's just so much that you can get done. I found from my work as an advocate, it's important, but it's translatable to anything you do, which is to don't give up on things that you believe in, and celebrate even small steps, because sometimes those can be seen as successes as well. This is also for everybody, but I think even particularly, not particularly for public interest lawyers, and that is to be honest, to give really fact-based analysis, really make your case. For public interest lawyers, what we have is true with all lawyers, though, you only really have your own reputation and your credibility, and we don't have any campaign contributions to give out. We don't take people out for dinner. So we really have to be really good in what we do. Find mentors, be one. Take positive risks, look for silver linings. I could go on and on, but I think I want to come back to the title of this, which was the responsibility and the privilege to work to ensure equal access or access to justice. And while I believe, as I said, that lawyers have a responsibility, in my heart, I really believe it's more of a privilege to be able to do so. So I look forward to the conversation. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave before it ends, so it's not that I'm not interested in everything you have to say. So, thanks.
I think I'm the only one up here who's mic'd in with an individual mic, so I have to remember to turn that on. First, thank you for inviting me to be here. It's always great to come back to the law school. I was mentioning earlier how much it's changed since the 2 years that I've been away. And Professor Rui said that he would take me on a tour one day when I come back. As far as Judge McKee is concerned and some of his background, I'm going to give you something that probably most of you don't know. He's an avid Cleveland Browns football fan.
I think you've told me that last Monday.
Well, you were happy last Monday, but you're unhappy this Sunday. Professor Rui mentioned the Vasquez case, Vasquez versus Carver, the Lehigh County case. And just as a footnote on what Professor Rui said, the conditions of confinement were horrendous at that institution. And if I went into them, you probably would find a difficult time believing them. Not only were there poor cells with a lack of access to courts, women were treated differently than men, and there was sexual abuse was rampant. But after litigating it, we arrived at a consent decree. And that consent decree, as you said, included the construction of a new prison. And I thought that my work was done and everything was right in the world. And then came along the Prison Litigation Reform Act, which I don't know whether you studied that or heard of it, but if you haven't, I suggest you take a look at it. Because it called into play the validity of prior consent decrees that had been signed and ordered by the court, approved by the court. Under that act, that consent decree was lifted. Well, they couldn't knock down the prison, so we prevailed in that regard. We then challenged the constitutionality of the Prison Litigation Reform Act. We lost below and we lost in the Third Circuit. I know Judge Alito was on the panel. I don't know whether he wrote the opinion. So it's...
Not on the panel, for the record.
You were not on the panel, that's right, that's right. So just a little something to keep in mind. I wanted to talk about some of the things that I tried to do as Chancellor of the Bar Association, and also under 6.1 and Rule 6.1 and 6.2, some concepts and questions that you might want to keep in mind, especially law students, as you go forward. When I was Chancellor in 1993, and each Chancellor has his or her own agenda that is set, but you have to carry this out within a year. So there's a lot of planning to get to that year where you actually go forward. There are a number of things that the bar was involved in, but two that I really like and am proud of as I reflect on that year are, one, something called a low-fee plan that we put in effect that was to enable people who were not in the CLS poverty guidelines or requirements, but yet not financially secure enough to get legal services, that middle ground, that group of people who fit that middle ground to get legal services on a reduced fee basis. And I thought that was important because there were a lot of people whose rights were not being vindicated and who were sort of falling through holes in the system. And to that day, that plan still exists, but I think they renamed it and it's probably been tweaked some, but that's still an important function of Rule 6.1 in my view, and also the Bar Association. The other is the formation of a capital case resource center. In order to get the center off the ground, we had to come up with, I think it was $200,000. And at that time, Pennsylvania's death row population problem was worse than it is now. And I haven't followed the problems in that area as closely as some of you may have followed it. But there was a study, I think a joint study by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and the Third Circuit, if I'm not mistaken, that came to the conclusion that something needed to be done in the capital case area. So we raised the $200,000, and not many people know this, but we got that money from Senator Vincent Fumo, who came up with that money, and it enabled us to get that capital case resource center off the ground and begin representing people on death row. Now, the problem was, after it was up and running for a year, Congress promptly defunded all of the resource centers. So then it kind of morphed into a different kind of organization. I think today the remains of that resource center are a part of the Federal Public Defender. And there's a woman named Maureen Rowley who was the Federal Defender. And if you don't know that name, you should, because Maureen was very instrumental in working with me and others to get that center up and running. Pardon me?
Another Penn Law grad.
Oh, yeah, she's wonderful. She was wonderful. Let me talk a bit about legal services under Rule 6.1 and court appointments under 6.2 within the context of law firms. Because as you know from the introduction and the material you have, I am a former partner at a law firm here in Philadelphia. The rule says that law firms should act reasonably to enable and encourage all lawyers in the firm to provide the pro bono legal services called for by this rule. This is comment 4 under the rule. And when it says should act reasonably, it started me to think that when I was a law student decades ago, I really didn't know what questions to ask or consider to really test a law firm's commitment to pro bono legal service. So I'm going to suggest to you some questions that you might consider as you look around and make your decision about whether you want to be with a law firm, and if so, what law firm. And the first one that I have is, are there senior partners and management partners at the firm who are involved in pro bono service? The next is, does the firm become involved in unpopular matters? And remember, Rule 6.2 refers to accepting appointments, and there's a specific reference in the rules to unpopular clients and unpopular matters. Does the firm financially support pro bono service and public interest organizations? Those such as PMC and HIAS. Is the public interest work encouraged by the firm, or is it just tolerated by the firm? Next, is it distinguished from marketing? By it, I mean public interest work. Is that work considered a part of marketing? And really, the firm looks at it as a part of enhancing the bottom line? Or is it valued for public interest work itself? How does public interest work at the firm, pro bono work, fit into compensation? How does pro bono work fit into billable hours expectations at the firm? Is there credit for pro bono hours? And what is the firm's reputation for pro bono service in the public interest community and the courts? And there are others I could add to this list. But these are questions and things that I didn't think of when I was a law student and as I was making a decision as to my future legal career. What we really run into a lot of times is, at law firms, is that that summer where you're wined and dined and you see the best of a firm. We put our best feet forward. But yet you may not get to probe and actually find out much about the culture of the firm. So my challenge to you is, as you make a decision where you want to go, think about those things. And in addition to that, as law students, this is probably a prime time in your life to let firms know what's important to you as a group. Firms react to the marketplace, and they react to what other peer firms do. So as firms know that public interest work is important to law students, some will react favorably to that interest. But again, your challenge is to do your due diligence and to look beyond the surface and sort of dig a little bit. The rule or the comments refer to public interest work, and especially work representing unpopular clients or unpopular matters, as being rewarding. And I suggest to you that it is very rewarding. As a matter of fact, as I look back on my legal career when I was practicing, the most rewarding work I did was public interest work. And there were ancillary cases that resulted from some public interest work that I did, not because I did the work to get those ancillary cases. If you don't involve yourself in a firm that allows you to do that kind of work and appreciates the work that you do, you will miss that experience. And I don't want you to miss that experience, because that's a part of being a fulfilled lawyer, happy or satisfied with the career that you've chosen. and going to sleep at night with the feeling that you've made a difference. And let me say before I close, and I know I've been addressing for the most part lawyers at private firms, and I've done that because of my background. But I think the true heroes of public interest work are public interest lawyers at organizations such as HIAS and CLS. I have made a good living over the years that I've been at the firm. But those people who have sacrificed the money that a firm lawyer can make to do public interest work and make a difference are the ones that we really should salute. So as you think about your path, think about all the paths that you have, and they're just two of the paths, there are others, to lead you to do the kind of rewarding work that we as a profession must do, and again, will make you proud to be a lawyer.
You know, I can't emphasize what a wonderful legal community this is and what wonderful people we have. Another example that comes to my mind is when Andre was sworn in as chancellor, we always had a big party at the Bellevue with lots of food and schmoozing. But Andre didn't want a big party, and he asked that the money from that party be donated to help Haitian children who, during that time, were arriving like the Central American children are today, escaping a horrific situation in Haiti. And that's what he did for his swearing in. So we're among people who, for want of a colloquial, who walk the walk, don't just talk the talk. It's an amazing legal community. And in that sense, I do have to acknowledge my board president, Elon Rosenberg, who's there, who took on the pro bono case and was on the team to fight a case in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, which was an anti-immigrant ordinance which was trying to set the stage for local enforcement of immigration laws across the country.
I was on that panel.
We're not going to talk too much about that, but needless to say, that law was declared unconstitutional and is no longer among us. And also a board member, Jason Leckerman, who is also in the school, and I'm actually going to talk about one of his cases, but I didn't know he'd be here, so this is even better. So what I'm going to talk about are a few lessons on what I've learned as a public interest lawyer, lessons in public interest lawyering, which are a little different take from years of experience. And the first lesson I want to talk about is listen to your clients. So, for example, we had a client named Taki Zubeda, who Judge McKee may remember because the case ended up in the Third Circuit. That was a pro bono case where we co-sponsored, co-counseled, where Taki had arrived fleeing from the Congo after being a victim of assault and rape. And people didn't believe her. And she was in detention for 3 years. And eventually, the case went up to the Third Circuit, and the scope of protection under the Convention Against Torture was started to be laid out through that case. Listen to your clients. Taki described a situation where rape was an instrument of war. Today, this last week, we're resettling Congolese refugees because, 2003, 11 years later, the U.S. government and the State Department and human rights people realized that's really what's going on in the Congo. And we're bringing in refugees who have fled these situations, many of them women, who were similarly situated to Taki. Now they're coming in legally. But we knew what was going on in 2003 because we listened to our client. Next is the cases don't actually end when the cases end, or the lives don't end. And you have to be committed for the long haul, just as when they build a new prison, the Congress comes in to make a new law, so you have to be vigilant. In Taki's case, we resolved her case 6 months ago. she got her green card. 2003 to 2014. And she's doing very well. She's a nurse. The second, so that's lesson number 2. It's not always over, and you have to remain vigilant. Lesson number 3, if something is unfair, you have to find a legal tool to challenge it. So, for example, this whole crisis with the Central American immigrant youth, that didn't happen this year. It started in the 80s. And through advocacy and through class actions and individual cases and settlements, we got to a place where we got some federal protection for children who arrive without parents from Central America. They can't be deported immediately. They're entitled to due process. They're entitled to someone to listen to their situation, because in Honduras, the murder rate is 9 times the murder rate in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's how dangerous it is. Listen to your clients. The other example of if it's unfair, challenge it is a case we did with Community Legal Services of an amputee who was trying to get citizenship, but they were backlogged for 2 years, and they cut off his Social Security, SSI, Supplemental Security, because they couldn't process his case. And through litigation and pro bono counsel, we were able to create an expedited process for people at risk of losing these safety net benefits. Something felt unfair about that. We did not have the legal tools right away to challenge it, but we found them. And Ballard was co-counsel in that case and did an excellent job. The next lesson is your clients are not powerless. Your clients can be empowering to you. They can be models. And in this case, Shmuel Kaplan went on to become the subject of a film filmed by the visual advocacy class here to talk about his life and his case, and it won an award at the Jewish Film Festival. So you never know. But we were able to create the message and send it in that way, and as a result of that case, Congress actually changed the law and extended the Social SSI benefits for a few years because people needed more time to become citizens. But clients being role models, I think my favorite client who's a role model is a woman named Jane, whose case was handled by Jason Leckerman and 2 other pro bono attorneys from Ballard. I met Jane because we were recruiting Liberian women who had suffered during the Civil War to develop testimony for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And Jane told me of another rape story, unfortunately, and it was a horrendous experience. It had actually ruined her life. She had gotten divorced twice. She was left with 3 children. She couldn't have a relationship, and her case was stuck. She had asked for asylum, but it was stuck. She had a temporary status, but not a permanent status, and she never felt like she could plan her life. I sent the case to Ballard, stuck for 13 years. And I'm going to tell you what Jane wrote to me about her case. And by the way, Jane wants me to talk about her rape because she said to me that it's very important that other women stand up. Jane, the role model. Jane, the person who empowered us to represent her. So here is an email I received from Jane. I wanted to thank you for your recommendation of Ballard Spahr. At last, I have seen the face of justice. I was granted asylum after 13 years of emotional journey. At some point, I never thought this day was ever going to come. The decision today made me feel like I have finally looked my rapist in his face, and this time, without fear, I imagine telling him, "You will no longer rape me. It is over. I am somewhere safe where you will never even find me. And if you ever even think of finding me, the law in this country will protect me from you. I can now say all these things because you believed me, and you also felt my pain and saw my trauma. Listen to your clients. Therefore, you got me the help I needed to cross my river of sorrow and experience the joy I once knew, the joy the rebels stole from me 21 years ago. My encounter with Ballard was wonderful. Just having them by my side and going through the process with me made the journey a lot easier. Even though there were some ups and downs, these three young people, I guess you were young back then, like you, saw my pain, hurt, and trauma, and were willing to give it their all to bring me to the finish line. And today, July 22nd, 2011, we crossed the finish line together when I was granted asylum. So that's my last lesson. I listen to my clients. They say it's so much better, the value of pro bono, the impact on their lives. And in immigration, I love immigration law. I love my clients. They tell me that USA means you start over. And they start over. And they give back more than I could ever give them. And many go on to great things. And I learned to treasure what I have in the United States, and I learned to fight for justice, and I learned how other people fight for justice in their own countries. So I'm able to travel the world without leaving my office. So that's another good aspect of immigration law. But I'm going to leave that aspect and just say that anybody can do this. You don't need to be an immigration lawyer. You don't need to be a litigator. Ballard doesn't even have an immigration department. They've taken 18 asylum cases, 100% track record, by the way. You don't need it. But what you need is the passion, you need the commitment, and you need mentoring from us, of course, but we're there. And we will train you and mentor you and help you, and you will get great meaning out of this work, and not just meaning for us, but you'll help society as a whole. Because as a society, you know, we are a nation of immigrants, but as a society, what are we unless we can help the least of us? I mean, that's the measure of who we are. So I think I'm done. Oh, I have to tell you about Judge McKee. Not Judge McKee. I could tell you about Judge McKee too, but that's another story. But Jerry McHugh, again, walked the walk. We began our journey representing unaccompanied minors a few years ago, and there was a kid in a Catholic school, and the nuns called and said, you got to represent this kid. He has no parents, and he's a good student, and he needs to stay here. Well, where is he going to stay? We'll provide the legal services. Who's he going to stay with? Do you know who took this child in and fostered this child? The man sitting on my left. Took that boy, I don't know where he is today because it was several years ago, but he had a very successful high school career, and he was able to stay in the United States and be protected. And I think the nuns might have something to do to convince him that this was the right thing to do, but I'm glad they did, and he and his wife are to be congratulated for being great human beings as well as he's a brilliant attorney. So that's the caliber of people you're looking at here. I'll end there.
You're probably going to start to hear echoes of themes, but actually what Judy talks about was just problem solving, because I was supposed to be the volunteer lawyer, and we were running up against a deadline when the young man was going to turn 18, and without a placement, he was done. And so there was nothing left to do to solve the problem other than to resign as counsel and become the foster parent. So, you do what you have to do, and I'll return to that a little later. My point of departure is, what's the difference between a degree from Wharton and a degree from the law school? And the difference, I would suggest, is that we are a profession. And think about what that term is, profession. I profess. We purport to stand for something. and for a set of values that, as Andre said, is embodied in a code of conduct. But even when you take the oath as office, the oath as an attorney in Pennsylvania talks about the office of attorney. That's exactly how it's phrased. And by office of attorney, it means that we truly are officers of our justice system. And then the question becomes, what role do we choose to play within that? Law is, of course, about making a living to some extent, but what I would suggest is where we depart from other ways of making a living is we do purport to stand for something. And with respect to pro bono, I believe that when we engage in pro bono service, we get in touch with those values that we profess about fairness, about access, about justice. And apropos of what Andre said, the meaning we then draw from our professional life is so much a function of those instances where we handle those cases, where we profess those values that we purport to stand for. And that is what pro bono means to me. Most of us will not go into full-time public service. And, you know, Judy and Kathy and Lou and others have done that. But many of us will be in the private sector, and we need to find our way within that sector. And Andre, those are great questions, and I love the practicality of the advice. You know, he's telling you how to get down to the fine points and work through that. Andre was a traditional lawyer in the sense he was with a major national firm. I was a boutique lawyer. I was a plaintiff's tort lawyer, which is, coming out of Penn Law, not the most usual path to take. But I found it rewarding personally because I represented individuals in great need. I could choose my cases. But I learned early on that being a contingent fee lawyer gives one great flexibility. You are not a slave of a timesheet. And then the question becomes, what do you do with that time if you can work efficiently? You could play golf or tennis or get a timeshare, or you could get in touch with those values that we hold dear. And to me, that's what a remarkable opportunity was in terms of doing that work. Whenever I thought about how to spend that time, I would think of people like Kathy and say, oh, wait a minute. She is giving her whole career to service. You can do more. You can do better. And so every time you think about, well, do I want to take on another commitment, you just have to ask, you remind yourselves of your heroes. All right? And Howard Lesnick was a hero to Kathy and I both, because he said, this is a model of being a lawyer that includes these aspirations of service. That's valid, go do it. And that meant a great deal. So what I did basically is pick and choose my way through a variety of interests, beginning with non-law related but sort of tangentially related work with ex-offenders. Because growing up in the city, I figured out early on life wasn't fair, and I started with certain advantages. And kind of staying there and watching that unfold, I did a lot of work first in the Philadelphia jails and then with ex-offenders, not really using any of my legal talents, except when I badly incorporated as a nonprofit and botched the 501c3 application. And then went to one of my classmates who was a tax lawyer, and she cleaned it up. But even there, what you learn is, if you involve yourself, you can reach out to others. And you can say, hey, I'm doing this. I think it's good. Do you mind helping? And do you mind helping? And do you mind helping? And each project you get into, you can go to others and say, now, would you help? And as you gradually weave them into the web, then we get to, well, how would you donate? Or would you volunteer? So just involving yourself, you become a presence, and then you can begin to connect dots in various different communities. So I would say if you're going to go into private practice, always ask yourself, what more can I be doing if I want to pursue these ideals? Get to know the folks who are doing it, and then ask them, what do you need help with? Another example, Michelle Cohen is here, who has done incredible work in the landlord-tenant area. And she was doing work with the Civil Gideon program in Philadelphia, and they had a tremendous proposal, but no funding. And I was hanging out with a bunch of big shot trial lawyers at the American College who were looking for good things to do. And so I was able to connect those two communities, American College trial lawyers with our own help desk in Philadelphia and landlord-tenant court, and we got it going. And so, right. And so, again, it's just a matter of saying, okay, where am I in my career? Whom do I know? What's somebody else doing on the front lines? How am I involved? And how can I connect those resources and connect those dots? And so if you get to know the people in the front lines, and they are the heroes, I like to say in the private bar, we're the stage crew, all right? We sort of, in some ways, make it possible for legal services lawyers and public interest lawyers to do what they can do. So let me talk about that a little bit. At a relatively early age, I got to hear Lou Ruley speak. And that was another aha moment where I said, boy, you're not doing enough. And I ended up getting dragged into what I'll call the infrastructure of legal services in the public interest community, the sort of behind-the-scenes work where we find the money, and first through Abe and another chancellor, Lou and Abe Rich, another chancellor, got on the IALTA board, which funds things, and from there the Philadelphia Bar Foundation, and then Pennsylvania Legal Aid Network. And I'll tell you, that's no fun. It's no fun at all, because it's all about fundraising and politics and lobbying and begging and administering and the stuff nobody really wants to do. But you have to do it so these folks on the front line can do the things that they want to do. And you just find yourself there accidentally, and you say, can I do this or can I not? But it's another way that you have to get the job done. So the myriad of opportunities that there are to try to just say what's good that's going on out there in our profession and keeping your ear to the ground is, I think, how those of us in private practice can make a difference and kind of connect the dots. And let me emphasize that that means sacrifice. When I talk to young lawyers, I always say, make it clear if you got billable hours and you got to make them up, then you make them up. And that may mean you're not playing tennis on Saturday. Or that might mean that you are working nights, but you're either in the game or you're not. And so I always have felt that pro bono meant, to a certain extent, commitment and sacrifice. And again, just compared to the sacrifice of those who have given their whole career to the public interest. And on that score, I would say for those of us who have successful careers, whatever you do, do not acquire a lifestyle that is commensurate with your professional success. Because if you don't, if you say, I'm not going to buy into that, and I'm not going to buy a Rolex, and I'm never going to drive a Mercedes, and there's nothing wrong with those things, but when you acquire the lifestyle, you acquire an obligation that I assure you will weigh you down and will prevent you from then doing many of the things that you want to do, which includes chucking it all and going on the bench.
That's very good research.
Judge McKee has pointed out it's like lightning in Saskatchewan. Process was going on. People said, well, you're a pretty good candidate. I said, yeah, well, a lot of folks think they're going to play in the NBA, and they all got talent. So, or as I like to say, I'd like to think that accidentally I have merit, but that may not have a whole lot to do with how you get there. But on that score, let me talk about the political process, okay? Be politically active. Get to know people. And I think Lynn said, be nice to the person with whom you disagree. And be able to reach across these partisan divides that we have. I was proud that at my swearing in, we had former Governor Rendell and his arch enemy, Dominic Pileggi, Majority Leader of the Republicans in the Senate, sitting side by side. And
Not speaking, but sitting.
and that as a Democrat who lost 41 votes in the Senate, Senator Greenleaf, chairman of the State Judiciary Committee, Republican, spoke at the swearing in. And political activity is tawdry. Let me be clear about that. But it is essential. And it's essential to be able to speak to people in power in a way and communicate with them effectively about the cause of equal justice, of funding of the people in the front lines, and find a way to be an advocate for those things that we hold dear as a profession. And it's even more important now, folks, because I will tell you there are fewer and fewer lawyers in the legislatures. And that is in part a reaction of the electorate to the supposed elites that we represent. But it's very important that those voices be heard. And so all I can say is think about why you wanted to become a lawyer. Think about those values that underlay the idea of a profession. And each day when you get up, say, do I want to advance that? And if so, how?
Okay, thanks. Well, Judy asked me, I guess if I remember Zubaydah or wasn't sure I remember Zubaydah. I cannot tell you how I remember Taki Zubaydah. I don't think a month goes by I don't think of her. When I'm asked to look back at my 20 years on the federal bench and think of those things that made me proudest, that is one of two cases I always think back on. And I almost teared up when you told me she was about to become a nurse. That is incredible. I remember that conference is what was yesterday. There were several discussions after that with some of my colleagues that I'll share with you afterward that were rather amazing. So I remember Miss Zubaydah incredibly well. So I'm just delighted for her. When you see her, give her a huge hug for me. Right? It's an Article III hug. But that also goes to some of the importance that I talked about earlier of broadening your perspective of public interest. And I still remember this. Judge Countryman, I think it was the immigration judge for Ms. Zubaydah. The immigration bar is something which is it's a different kind of animal, and it's changing, thank goodness. I think President Obama's done an awful lot to upgrade the quality of the bench, and I've had conversations with people in the executive branch, so I'm not speaking out of school being politically, because I think they would agree. They realize how bad it is, and there are a lot of reasons for that, and they're trying to do something about it. But she had a judge who went into that hearing not biased in a way of thinking, I've got to find a way to send this woman back. And I'm convinced, and I've said this in opinions, that there are immigration judges, and we've gotten 2 of them off the bench, actually. And one of my very conservative colleagues wrote an opinion about a year and a half ago, just blasting an immigration judge, and he was so bad that he was removed from the bench and is not allowed to hear immigration cases anymore. But she had a judge who cared to do the right thing, and the record was built. There was enough on that record that we could work with. But the different immigration judge, Ms. Subeda, would have been sent back to Congo, because we wouldn't have, when I said we, the panel in the Third Circuit, would not have had what we needed to try to get a result that we thought was appropriate under the law and required by justice. So in that sense, she lucked out. So think broadly. There are a lot of different ways that if your interest takes you in that way, in that direction, that you can help out. Judy said also, listen to your client. That I don't think you understand how big a role you can have in humanizing your client and giving dignity to your client. Many times, especially in the criminal context, you'll be one of the few people who will have treated your client with respect. And that means more than I can possibly convey to you. And even as a judge, and I won't get into the story now, but I remember sentencing somebody to life imprisonment one time, and he thanked me for it. And we had this little discussion afterward, which really brought home to me how some people are, as somebody who was doing life at Camp Hill once told me, some people are dealt a hand at life that they just can't play. And it's not to make excuses for them, because we're responsible for our actions, but I'm not arrogant enough to think that if I were dealt the same hand that some of those folks were dealt, that I would play it any better than they have. And I think by establishing a relationship with certain clients, you can really go a long way, really toward changing their life, regardless of the outcome of the case. Hopefully you get a favorable outcome, and a just outcome, but whether you get a just and favorable outcome or not, and you may not, you may get what you would define as an unjust outcome, you can still have a real impact on their life. What Andre said about law firms, I cannot overemphasize that. So many times when Kathy and Judy know this better than me, that when law firms, when nonprofit organizations need resources, need talent, need a conference room or conference center with Wi-Fi to hold a meeting in, they don't pick up the phone and call another nonprofit who is equally as underfunded as they are. They call a law firm, and that's where they go for the money and the resources, and it's a necessity, and there's nothing wrong with it. If you go to a firm, as Andre said, there are many ways of selecting a firm to get someplace which will have values and options that are important to you and consistent with the way you want to live your life. And that is something that you should consider. I don't think you have to take a vow of poverty to do public interest work. And if you can do really good public interest work without taking a vow of poverty, more power to you. I've never found yet a filet mignon that tasted, I've never found a hamburger that tasted better than filet mignon. So, I mean, there's something to be said about a decent level of income. But I so admire, as we said earlier, and Andre touched on it, those folks who have actually taken a vow of poverty without formally taking one, like Judy and Kathy, and really have sacrificed incredible resources, given their incredible legal talent that's recognized throughout the Philadelphia community and this region and perhaps nationally, have sacrificed the kinds of options that they do have to do work which is so important. I mean, sacrificing lifestyle. But there's another road that some of you are not willing to do that. You can still have a meaningful impact on the quality of life of others without taking that biggest step toward sacrifice. And with family, sometimes you can't do it. I mean, you might not have that option. And what Jerry said about being politically active, is also incredibly important. I can't stress that. Years ago, I had a conversation with the mayor when I was in city government. It was a very candid conversation, and I can't remember what brought it up, but he knew I wanted to run for common police court at the time, and he was kind enough to strategize with me ways that I could do that and be employed, because as this deputy city solicitor, I couldn't be politically active under the Home Rule Charter, which that's how I ended up going to the Philadelphia Parking Authority. It's a state agency. Not only can you be politically active there, you must be politically active. You take a vow of political action when you walk in the door. Everybody there is, at least back then, I don't think it's changed, is a ward leader, a committeeman, or somebody who's a relative of a ward leader or committeeman. So you learn not to say anything bad about anybody, because you never know who's listening, and you might tick off a committeeman, and there goes that ward. But anyhow, I was having a conversation with the mayor, and we were talking particularly about the black turnout. And he said, Ted, it's just a fact of life. The black community in the city simply does not turn out to vote. Neither does the Latino community or the Asian community. They simply do not vote. So when I sit down and we strategize and we look at numbers of voters and think about policies, I got to be honest with you. The fact that more than 50% of this city is either black or Latino, as it was in the time, he didn't count Asians into the equation, doesn't really mean much, because that's a universe that we don't have to be accountable to. And I couldn't believe he was being that candid with me. I had a good relationship with him. I didn't think it was that candid. But I never forgot that. The absence of voting is noted. And Edmund Burke said, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. That is so incredibly true. All you have to do is sit home, sit on your butt, have a brewski, and pick up the remote and flip through the evening news, and then maybe go to some mindless reality show while the election returns are coming in on some other channel. You can go through life perfectly content that way, but then don't bitch when it rises up and bites you in the ass, as it will sooner or later. Political action is incredibly important, and you need to get involved in an honest way, no matter what side of the spectrum you get involved in. As long as it's honest and carefully thought out, we need people to be involved. I had a couple other things to say, but I won't go on with it. I'll ask you folks or the audience if they have any questions.